Gaza hospital attack, there's a clash of narratives, clash of claims and counterclaims. Now, this is what Palestine's charge is, that the IDF thought that the hospital was a Hamas base and that's where they attacked it. Israel has countered that by saying if this was indeed an air-to-ground strike by Israeli aircraft, then no craters have been found, which is consistent with an airstrike. There'll be massive craters if this was an air-to-ground missile. The Palestinian charge is that Israel is changing its story only to shift the blame back to Hamas and to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad groups. Meanwhile, Israel's counter is also this rocket attack was not so powerful that there was any structural damage to nearby buildings. If it was an air-to-ground strike, then there would be massive damage to the neighborhood. Palestine's charge is that the IDF had specifically said that people need to evacuate this particular hospital. This order, in fact, came just a couple of days ago. Israel's counter is that Hamas realized that it was a rocket that Hamas itself had fired, which misfired and hit the hospital building. The charge from the Palestinians that Israel is responsible for the deaths of 500 civilians who were receiving treatment in the hospital. The counter from Israel is that Hamas is doing this campaign to inflate the death toll. Now, no matter which side you believe, the Israeli side or the Hamas side, fact of the matter is that it got a huge fillip. The Israeli side and their claim got a huge fillip when Joe Biden, the US president, was in Israel and tended to agree that it was not carried out by the Israeli side, but by what he said was the other team. Let's listen into what Joe Biden said, and then I'll go across to our guests.
Americans are agreeing with you. They really are. And Americans are worried. Americans are worried because we know this is not an easy field to navigate, what you have to do. Explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you. But there's a lot of people out there who are not sure. So we've got to overcome a lot of things.
Let's get to the big debate tonight here on Brass Tacks. Is the Gaza hospital bombing a turning point in this conflict?
Hello, Moto.
All right, let me go across to our guests who are now joining us. I'll be joined in a moment by Daniel Carman. He's the former Israeli ambassador to India. Rohan Gunaratna is an author and security expert. Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, joining us. And Raymond Vickery is author and advisor on US-India ties. Raymond Vickery, let me start with you first, because there's this fog of war and it's becoming increasingly difficult to establish who was behind that attack on the hospital. But today, President Biden was in Tel Aviv and he said, from whatever he has seen, it appears that that bombing was carried out by the other team, his words, and not by you, meaning Israel. So how much of a fillip does that give to Israel's claim, the IDF's claim? And now that Biden has said this publicly, do you believe it's also bases independent assessments by the Pentagon, by US intelligence, and not just going by what the Israelis have claimed?
Well, thanks very much for having me. This indeed is a very serious turning point, I believe. I want to step back and say how extraordinary it is for a president of the United States to go to a war zone. And I believe that President Biden is doing this basically for one reason, and that is to try to keep the fire, the war from spreading, and particularly getting Iran and its proxies into the war. So I think his message is one, yes, support for the Israelis in the face of what is obviously a terrorist attack. Terrorism has been a focus of the government of India as well as the U.S. And Israel. But two, to try to open up a corridor for relief. He has announced just a few minutes ago additional funds and progress in terms of opening to Egypt for this. But there's no question that it seems that the whole narrative that this was Israeli bombing of this hospital is is coming unraveled. You've seen the video. The video shows a great flame, which is not consistent with the kind of strike and aftermath that you would have from missiles. Mm-hmm. I would also point out that this is a Christian-run hospital, and so there is that aspect to it. I think it's circumstantial, but you have to look at who does this benefit. President Biden is there to try to keep the war from spreading, to minimize casualties, and this strike, it really blows a serious damage into that. Now, who benefits from that? It's not Israel that benefits from that. It seems to me it's clearly Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and those who want to widen the war. The cancellation of the face-to-face meeting, of course, is a setback, and so I think you have to look at it from that perspective as well.
So, Rohan Gunaratne, before I get to whether this will spread into a regional war, what happens to Biden's efforts to try and contain this between Israel and Hamas, and of course, Raymond Vickery is right. He was supposed to go to Jordan, meet with the leaders of Jordan, Egypt, and Palestinian Authority. That's not happening as a consequence of it. I'll get to all of that in 1 second, but I want to understand from you, in your long years as a security affairs expert, as a counter-terror expert, from whatever pictures you've seen in the public domain, the argument that if this were carried out by Israeli forces and if this was an air-to-ground missile attack, then you would see large craters there, which we're not seeing at this point of time. Does that argument hold for you? That alone would prove to you that this was not an air-to-ground Israeli rocket or an Israeli missile which caused the attack at the hospital, but this was something likely from the ground, from the Palestinian side, from the Gazan side?
The attack was very clearly mounted by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Both SIGINT, the signals intelligence, and imagery intelligence that the Israelis have released confirms this. If anyone has any doubt, they should look at the imagery and the signals intelligence that has been made public. And if anyone wants to further investigate, they can ask the technical experts, either of Britain or the United States or any other country, to ask other parties to present evidence. Today, over the Gaza Strip, there are so many satellites. And I want you to know that if the Israelis did it, it was very counterproductive, because this is the time we can prevent this Gaza conflict from becoming a regional conflict. Mm-hmm. And that has been effectively derailed by the attack on this hospital, because the Arab Street is today calling the shots. And I think that the party that did this attack has to take full responsibility for it.
So I think to that extent, let me bring in Daniel Carman into this conversation, former Israeli ambassador to India. When President Biden, just a day before he left, the initial plan was that he would come to Tel Aviv, he would meet with Benjamin Netanyahu, and then he would go to Jordan. He would meet with the King of Jordan, he would meet with the Egyptian president, the Palestinian Authority president. But that second leg of his visit got completely cancelled in the aftermath of this hospital attack. So what are the hopes and what are the realistic assessments of this war being contained into a conflict between Israel and Hamas and not spreading into the wider Arab world? Because right now, as Rohan Gunaratne said a moment ago, the mood on the Arab street seems to be no reconciliation. If this is going to be a wider war, then so be it. Does Israel want a wider war? Is Israel ready for a wider regional conflict?
Of course, there is this fear, and minutes ago someone of my predecessors here talked about a turning point. I think we should go back to the facts, and some of the facts were mentioned here before about what I don't call it an attack on the hospital. I would call it a failed launch of a terrorist attack intended towards Israel. There are all the circumstances that can show it, including the photographic evidence on the crater, that there is no crater, a phone conversation when practically two Hamas people were talking with each other, asking each other, what was it? Was it bombing by the Israelis? And then a Hamas guy says to another Hamas guy, it's not the Israelis. The Israelis don't work with such kind of ammunition. It is the others, the Islamic Jihad. And Israel could react immediately saying it's not us, but we waited, the IDF spokesperson waited for an hour. After checking, gave the bottom line of this failed terrorist launch. And I have to add a data maybe that is not known. During those 11 days, more than 450 rockets launched from terrorist Gaza towards Israel fell into Gazan territory out of a few thousands that were launched towards Israel. So it's a huge number, and any one of those can, be defined as an Israeli attack. But Israel does not bomb areas such as hospitals or around mosques or around schools unless they are part of, the human shield apparatus.
So let me ask Ashok Sajjanhar. So even if this happened inadvertently by the Palestinian terrorists, by the Hamas terrorists firing rockets into Israel, and one of it inadvertently hit this hospital building, it does beg the question, Ashok Sajjanhar, what sort of grouping which claims to represent a set of people would go to the extent of killing their own 500 civilians who were receiving treatment inside a hospital building? What sort of group goes to that extent for this kind of mass killing just to gain international sympathy? I mean, I can't think of, the IRA or the LTTE. They may have killed individual cases in one or two or a few dozen cases, but 500 at one go in a civil hospital, I mean, I find it hard to wrap my head around that. What does it say about that particular group?
You're very right, Zaka. I think this is quite unimaginable. And, this is, I think two scenarios have been presented. One is that it could have happened by mistake, by chance, that, it has gone and it has struck this hospital, as has been the case with several other rockets. They can misfire and they can go there. And of course, they are trying to make the most of this mistake that they have done. And of course, they have a very credulous and readily believing audience globally that, it would have been done by Israel. The second is that they would have done it intentionally, and that, of course, is very, very evil, intentionally to get international support, because they know that whether it is Israel or it is the West or it is the United States, they are under pressure. So, making sacrifice of some of these 500 of these people, well, that is, a just cause for this. We have seen how these Hamas terrorists, they have, butchered, they have massacred the people in the south of Israel, how they have come across and they have killed them. So I think and we know that they do not, the Hamas or the Islamic Jihad, they do not represent the interests of the Palestinian people. And those who have been claiming that it could have been done by, or it would have been done by Israel, I don't buy that argument at all. Okay. Because I think it would be definitely, it would be politically and strategically very harmful, very damaging, and very immature on the part of Israel.
So how does one sort of separate what has happened on the battlefield and this whole fog of war completely clouding propaganda, if you will? I want to ask Raymond Vickery this, because not just this hospital story, in the immediate aftermath, there was one set of people who came out and said, oh, Israel's done it and somebody needs to put guardrails on what Israel's doing. Israel can't have this kind of carte blanche, as it were, as it got over the last 10 days to go into Gaza and do whatever it pleases in response to the terror attack that happened on Israeli soil on 7th of October. And yet, we also saw last week the whole story of the beheading of the babies. Again, there was a group of people who came out and said that, look, this is what Hamas has done. The Israeli Defense Forces came out with some kind of proof for the decapitation of these babies, and yet people were not willing to believe. They were saying that, you know, this is the state saying so, and they will say whatever they want to justify an imminent Gazan invasion. How does one separate in this fog of war, Raymond Vickery, what is true and what isn't? Because both sides are playing the propaganda game.
Well, there's no question about that, but there has to be some modicum of trying to discern what the facts are. And I believe the President of the United States doesn't make the kind of statements that he's made about he thinks it was the other team without some basis. And your analysts have looked at the pictures. You see that it's flames which are inconsistent with the air-to-ground strike, and there are other indications. Now, there's nothing positive that you can say. There is the fog of war, but we have to realize that Hamas and Islamic Jihad are really adherents to the sort of ISIS terrorist approach, and that no atrocity is too great if it serves the cause of the terrorists. India has been fighting terrorism for these many years. The Prime Minister has said that this is not a time for war. So there is an attempt, at least on the part, I know, of the United States to be able to sort out fact from fiction. Do you have definitive proof? No, you don't. But again, I would say you have to look at who benefits from this kind of atrocity. It's certainly not those like President Biden and others who want to keep the war from spreading. It's those who want to spread it as much as it can and have an ideology which includes it's all right to behead babies or kill grandmothers and mothers, so long as you're able to put forth the agenda of the terrorists.
So Daniel Carmen, you have a unique situation here where on the one hand, it is now becoming apparent through evidence, whether it's phone intercepts or through pictures that have been taken, that it's likelier, and even the US president has said this, it's likelier that it was carried out by Hamas or by Palestinian terrorists and not by the Israeli Defense Forces. And yet, the mood on the Arab street across the Arab world is so incensed by what happened at the Gaza hospital yesterday that they want nothing short of blood, of Israeli blood. So much so, the King of Jordan cancelled the US president's meetings with him, with the Egyptian leader, and with the president of the Palestinian Authority. How do you reconcile the two? Israel also has an interest in making sure that this doesn't become a wider regional conflict with the rest of the Arab world. But the Arab street wants to make it so, and it seems to be moving in that direction, at least from the mood on the street, whether it's in Cairo or in Amman or in other parts of the Arab world.
Israel has
Daniel Carmen, thank you.
Yes, I must go back to your previous question because I cannot accept the terminology saying that both sides are playing the propaganda game. What happened to our people, our elderly, babies, mothers, people with on wheelchairs in the middle of a festival? You all saw the videos, and you saw much more than we do because they are not broadcast fully in Israel because of sensitivity. What happened here is a manslaughter, and I cannot accept that this is put under the headline of propaganda game. I'm part of a forum of families of missing hostages and missing families forum. I hear the people who don't know where 200 of their relatives are kept in captivity by a terrorist organization. Some have been killed, probably. Some have been burned. This is not a propaganda game, guys. This is not a propaganda game. This is an atrocity that you can
No, but
compare.
Mr. Carmen, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about the choice of words, but it is also equally true that a number of Palestinian civilians have also died in the Israeli airstrikes over the last 10 days. In fact, the numbers, and I'm never a believer of comparing numbers and numbers, but the fact is there are like more than 4,000 Palestinians who've died in the last 10 days compared to 1,400 Israelis. And you can go back to any number of wars that have been fought in the last 30 years. The proportion of Palestinians who've died at Israeli hands, Israeli airstrikes and Israeli mortar fire is far more than Israeli civilians. I'm not saying that that's a justification, but fact is that civilians have died on the other side as well, and in large numbers.
Of course, we will never compare numbers, and we will never apologize for having an Iron Dome that does not let any of those thousands of rockets. I'm sitting here in the safe room. Yesterday, I was here for three or four different periods of time because of rockets. So we will not apologize for having technology, but that's a war. It's a fierce war that was declared on my country. My country is fighting a war.
Okay.
President Biden has repeated more than once, and we hear him, that democracy should be fighting within the limits of the international law, and that's clear, and that's
absolutely
always been the case. But
absolutely,
in a war,
I think that is the limited point, that democracies have to function within international law. Even if they are going to war, there are Geneva Conventions where civilians can't be targeted. There are rules of war. But we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. I know it's a difficult situation. You've had the worst terror attack on your soil. You also are confronted with an enemy that is using civilians as human shields to hide the terrorists. So it's not an easy task. Let's make absolutely no mistake about it. But having said that, the pressure on the international community, the pressure on Israel is to ensure that there are guardrails, that civilians are not targeted just indiscriminately, and that this is not allowed to spread into a wider regional conflict, which is exactly what Hamas wants, which is exactly what Hezbollah and Iran want, and which is the last thing that Israel or any of its friends or well-wishers need. But let me go